You ever wake up one morning and just know deep down something's off, like the land itself is holding its breath? That's how it started for me. Just another dawn on my pasture out by Silver Ridge. Dew on the fence line, coffee in my hand, the dog trailing behind me, tail lazy in the mist. I'd spent years out there finding peace after my wife passed. Just me, the quiet, and the rhythm of the earth. But that morning, that peace cracked. I heard diesel engines before I saw them, the low grind of steel chewing at wet dirt. At first I figured maybe county workers were fixing the road again, or patching a washout from the last storm. But when I rounded the barn, I saw the truth. And my heart went cold. Right past my fence line, a big yellow excavator was digging into the slope like it owned the place. Buckets of red clay swinging in the air, and standing there, arms crossed like she'd just won a chess match, was Marla Benton, the brand new HOA president of the Ridgeview Heights subdivision. I'd seen her once at a community event. Red blazer, hair so neat it looked ironed. That practice smile she probably used to sell houses before she got into neighborhood politics. She spotted me right away and waved like we were old friends. "Morning, Mr. Cole," she called out. "Lovely property you've got here." I stopped at the fence and asked the only question that mattered. "What the hell are you doing to my field?" Marla lifted a clipboard like it was a shield. "Erosion control," she said sweetly. "This runoff from your land has been flooding our community greenbelt. We're building a retention berm to manage stormwater." I blinked, half sure I'd misheard. "You're damming the natural drainage?" "It's preventative," she said, smiling like I was a child asking why the sky's blue. "We're protecting the neighborhood's infrastructure. You've got all this open space. It makes sense to hold runoff here instead of flooding the tennis courts." "It's not empty," I said, pointing toward the pasture. "I've got livestock down there. Calving season's next week." Marla gave that tiny shrug people give when they're pretending to care. "They'll adapt. Besides, the HOA has the right to mitigate environmental risks on adjacent land." I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Not without permits, you don't. And not without talking to the landowner." She tilted her head. "If you have concerns, feel free to attend our next board meeting." And just like that, she turned and walked back to her shiny white SUV, leaving the excavator roaring behind her like some mechanical beast. I stood there long after she left, mud sucking at my boots, and I could feel it deep in my gut, the kind of wrong that doesn't go away by itself. That night, I pulled out my old maps, the topographic surveys, the FEMA floodplain overlays, even fired up my dusty old laptop from when I used to work civil projects for the Corps of Engineers. The model confirmed it. If that berm went up, it would choke off the natural drainage and flood half my pasture. Called the county, no permits on file. I called the environmental board, no record, nothing. She hadn't just overstepped. She'd skipped every law meant to stop exactly this kind of stupidity. The next morning, I walked the property line with my phone, recording everything. The workers looked away when I passed. Contractors never like getting caught in someone else's mess. By evening, I'd filed 3 complaints. Each one met with the same canned response. "We'll open an investigation." I'd seen enough government paperwork in my life to know that meant, "We'll do nothing." 3 days later, Marla showed up again. This time with Dennis Hale, the HOA treasurer, a man who always had a Bluetooth in his ear, and a look that said he thought spreadsheets were a personality. They strutted onto my land like it was a public park. "Your men are trespassing," I said, voice flat. Dennis smiled the way salesmen do when they're about to lie. "No one's trespassing, Mr. Cole. We're improving community drainage. It benefits both sides." "Good neighbors ask first," I said. "Good neighbors don't build illegal dams." Marla folded her arms. "It's still on HOA land." "No," I said. "That fence marks my boundary. I've got the deed, the survey, and the topographic certificate to prove it," she smirked. "Even if it is, it's just grass, Mr. Cole." Something in me snapped. Not in anger exactly, but in that old steady way you feel right before a storm hits. "It's pasture," I said quietly. "And there are pregnant cows down there." "They'll adapt," she said again like she was rehearsing a line. "You'll take that wall down, or I will." Dennis raised a hand like he was mediating peace talks. "Let's not escalate." I leaned forward, eyes locked on Marla. You've violated environmental codes, trespassing laws, and federal runoff guidelines. You built without notice, and you think I'm gonna roll over. You're wrong." They left soon after, whispering something as they walked. I didn't care. That night I began assembling my case. Photos, property lines, drone scans. I built a digital binder that could choke a server. But all the evidence in the world doesn't move faster than a thunderstorm. When the rain came, it came hard. By dawn, the lower field was under 6 inches of water. I watched the calves shift nervously, hooves sinking into the muck, the dam holding, but in the wrong direction. The water wasn't draining out. It was backing up. I grabbed a shovel and worked for hours, carving an emergency trench to reroute it away from the lowest basin. My body ached, fingers numb. But I kept digging until the water finally started to flow. For a moment, I thought I'd won. Then 3 days later, I found them. 2 calves lying half-submerged, bloated, eyes glazed over. The smell hit before I even got close. My vet friend Tom came by and knelt beside them. "Fertilizer and pesticide runoff," he said quietly. "Whatever they're spraying up the hill got caught in your basin." "That's not runoff," I said. "That's entrapment," he nodded slowly. "You need to report this to the State Environmental Board right now." I did. But before the state could respond, the HOA struck first. A thick envelope in my mailbox, 3 violations. Excessive odor, unauthorized trenching, livestock waste runoff, $1,000 fine. I laughed so hard I scared the dog. They flooded me with paper like they were trying to drown me twice. Once in mud, once in bureaucracy. But they didn't know who they were up against. I'd survived worse storms than them. That same week, a brown envelope showed up at my gate, no return address. Inside was a printed memo labeled Stormwater Containment Plan, unofficial draft. It detailed everything: the dam's purpose, how runoff from the subdivision would be redirected into my field, and the line that froze my blood: proceed without permit. Legal exposure minimal. Attached was a screenshot from a group chat. Marla: "If he wants to play engineer, let him dig his own grave." Dennis: LOL, hope the cows don't sue. Marla again: "He'll break before the berm does." They knew what they were doing. They knew it was illegal, and they laughed about it. I sent it all to the State Water Board and to an old colleague, Janice Rivera, who now worked as a hydrologist. She called me that night, her voice sharp and nervous. "Cole, that structure violates every code we've got. It's not a berm, it's a dam. If it fails, it's going to dump half a neighborhood's stormwater straight down Willow Run." "Could it break?" I asked. "Under heavy rainfall?" "Absolutely." And right then I realized Marla's wall wasn't just a violation. It was a loaded gun pointed downhill. The storm warning started rolling in. Category 3 was forming in the Gulf, tracking straight toward us. The HOA kept doubling down. Noise complaints, vehicle violations, unauthorized equipment use because I ran my generator. They fined me for everything except breathing. I installed trail cams to catch them trespassing. One night at 2 a.m., I caught a volunteer sneaking along my fence with a tape measure. It was absurd, but it was evidence. Then the sky turned gray, the air heavy and electric. I stood on my porch staring at that concrete wall at the edge of my field, and I thought about my wife, how she died years ago in a landslide that city engineers said would hold. They were wrong then. And Marla was wrong now. I promised myself once I'd never watch silence destroy people again. The first drops came like whispers, then like bullets. The rain hammered the tin roof. The wind howled through the trees, and I could hear the dam groaning in the dark. The sound of pressure building, like breath being held too long. At 3:17 a.m., the world split open, a crack like gunfire, then a roar that shook the ground. I ran outside, flashlight cutting through the rain. Just in time to see it. The wall explode, concrete chunks flying. A wave of brown water and mud ripping through the pasture and rolling straight into Ridgeview Heights. I stood on the ridge helpless as the floodlights below flickered out one by one. Cars floated, trees bent sideways, rooftops vanished under a torrent of sludge. And somewhere down there, above the noise, I heard a scream. A woman's voice calling for help. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just watched as the dam Marla built to protect her perfect lawns tore her world apart. By sunrise, the neighborhood was unrecognizable. 20-some houses damaged, A dozen condemned, the HOA clubhouse buried in mud. News choppers circled overhead. Reporters calling it a once-in-a-century flood. I just called it predictable. That afternoon, I got a letter from the HOA's lawyers. They were blaming me, said my emergency trench destabilized the flood structure. I laughed until my chest hurt. Then I called Janice. They're trying to pin it on you too, she said. But don't worry. Our investigation shows your trench actually diverted flow away from the homes. They're scared, Cole. The county's embarrassed, the state's furious, and the HOA's collapsing under its own lies. Good, I said softly. Maybe they'll finally listen. But storms don't care about justice. Another system was forming in the Gulf. Bigger, meaner, and heading straight for us. And that's when Marla called me. Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It was small. Mr. Cole, she said, I know we've had our differences, but there are still families here, children, elderly. If you have any of your flood equipment, sandbags, pumps, we need help. I should have hung up. God knows she deserved the silence, but all I could think about was my wife and that promise I made years ago. All right, I said finally, I'll come. By the time we rolled down Ridgeview Drive, the street didn't look like a neighborhood anymore. It looked like a wound carved into the earth. The asphalt was split open, yards torn up. The neat rows of mailboxes leaning like they'd surrendered to gravity. The air stank of mildew and fertilizer, and something sour underneath, like the earth itself was tired of being rearranged. My two buddies, Jonah and Pete, both Army Reserve guys who'd helped me through worse, jumped off the truck before I could even park. We started unloading sandbags and pumps without saying a word. Some folks stepped out of their homes, faces pale, eyes wide. The kind of look people get when they realize comfort is just another word for luck. A woman in a windbreaker came running down the driveway, two kids peeking from behind her. We thought no one would come, she said, voice trembling. I almost didn't, I told her, and she didn't know whether to thank me or cry. We worked fast, muscle memory doing the thinking for us. Sandbags along the collapsed gutters. Pumps positioned to push the rising water toward the street's lower runoff. The same trench they'd mocked me for digging weeks ago was now the only thing carrying water away, instead of toward them. Neighbors joined in, people who'd never spoken to me before, passing bags down the line, shouting over the wind. For a moment, it felt like the way things used to be before all the HOA nonsense turned community into control. Then she appeared, Marla. She was standing on her porch steps. Hair-soaked, red robe clinging to her like a confession. She still had that clipboard, but now her hand shook when she raised it. Mr. Cole, she called out, voice breaking through the storm. I made a mistake. We all did. I looked up from the pump I was adjusting and didn't say a word. You warned us, she said, and I didn't listen. I walked up a few steps until I was close enough to see the guilt in her eyes. You built a dam to protect yourself and drowned my land to do it, I said quietly. You killed my calves. You poisoned my soil. You turned me into the villain because you couldn't admit you were wrong. She didn't argue. Didn't even try. Just nodded once, rain running down her face like she'd been waiting to break. Then the wind shifted, sharp and angry, and someone screamed from down the street. I turned just in time to see a driveway collapse. Marla's driveway. Crumbling into the gully the HOA had built up with fake fill years ago. The soil underneath was soup now, the whole slope sliding. Her car teetered for a second before it vanished into the hole, water rushing in after it. Marla froze on the porch, clutching the railing. Pete grabbed a rope from the truck. She's gonna go in. I didn't think. I just ran. The ground was slick, the rain blinding, but somehow I reached her as her foot slipped. I caught her wrist, bones light and trembling under my hand, and pulled with everything I had. Jonah grabbed my belt, anchoring me as we dragged her back onto the porch. She collapsed against the wall, gasping, coughing, half sobbing. Why did you help me? She stammered. I leaned back against the railing, breath burning in my chest. Because even when someone builds a dam against you, I said, you don't let them drown. We stayed through the night, clearing drains, rerouting flow, doing what the HOA never did, protecting people instead of appearances. By dawn, the storm broke. The light came soft and gray, spilling over wreckage and waterlogged lawns. But the worst had passed. Nobody died. For once, that was enough. A few days later, county trucks rolled in. FEMA tents went up. The mayor called it a catastrophic infrastructure failure. I called it justice with muddy boots. The HOA tried to fight it, of course, they always do. But when the state investigation started, they didn't have a prayer. That leaked memo and those text messages were the nails in their coffin. Gross negligence, environmental endangerment, property damage, the works. When they called me to testify, I brought the same binder I'd built months ago, the one full of maps. Drone shots, violations, every email, every picture. The county panel asked if I believed the HOA acted knowing the risks. I didn't hesitate. They knew, I said. And they did it anyway. The room went quiet. Someone from the environmental board nodded slowly. That's all we needed, Mr. Cole. The story hit the news within a week. Retired engineer warns HOA, ignored, dam bursts. It spread faster than the flood did. My inbox filled with messages from strangers all over the country. Farmers, homeowners, even city workers. People who'd fought their own little battles against HOAs that forgot what community meant. Some sent photos, others just sent thanks. A man from Texas wrote, "You didn't just save your land, you spoke for all of us." But I wasn't thinking about fame or victory. What I felt was quieter, a kind of release. For the first time in years, the silence on my pasture felt peaceful again. Not the silence of being ignored, but the kind that comes after you've been heard. Months passed. The state dissolved the HOA board. Marla resigned before they could remove her. She left town in the middle of the night. No announcement, no goodbye. Someone said she went to stay with her sister in Oregon. Maybe that's true. Maybe she just wanted to disappear. The county reimbursed me for the damages. They even named a new law after my late wife, the Laura Cole Stormwater Safety Act, requiring public permits for any HOA construction and mandatory environmental oversight. When I heard that, I stepped outside and just stared at the sky. It wasn't pride I felt. It was grief finally exhaling. I rebuilt the pasture slowly, using the settlement to regrade the land, dredge the poisoned soil, and plant native grass that could survive the wet seasons. Where the dam had once stood, I planted a row of sycamores, 6 thin, stubborn saplings stretching toward the light. My daughter came home from college that spring. She's studying civil engineering like her mother used to. We walked the field together, her arm hooked through mine. She looked around at the green returning and smiled. "You did it, Dad." I shook my head. We did it. And so did the land. When she left, I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee and watched the wind move through those young trees. The ground still bore scars, but it was healing, and so was I. A week later, a small envelope showed up in my mailbox, handwritten, no return address. "Mr. Cole, I know an apology can't undo what I've done, but I want you to know I'm sorry. You were right. I was warned. I didn't listen. I hope someday this place becomes what it was meant to be. Not a neighborhood of rules, but of care. You reminded us what stewardship really means. Take care of your land. I'll take care of my own." I read it once, then again, then folded it and slid it into the back of the binder where it belonged. Not as proof, but as a reminder. Even arrogance can learn, sometimes too late. Ridgeview Heights no longer has an HOA. The city took over maintenance, set up a resident council that actually listens. They even put up a small monument at the old dam site, a stone marker carved with the words, "Here stood a wall, built on silence." It was broken by truth and washed away by rain. Every now and then I walk down there at sunset. The air smells cleaner now. Kids ride bikes where the mud used to be. My dog runs free again. And when the wind passes through the sycamores, it sounds a little like water finding its way home. Sometimes people ask if I ever forgave Marla. Truth is, forgiveness isn't the right word. The storm already did that for me. It took down the walls, the lies, the noise, and left behind something honest. So, yeah, maybe that's what this story's really about. Not revenge, not justice, but the truth that sooner or later, the water always finds its way back to where it belongs. And now I want to ask you, if it were you in my boots, watching someone build a dam on your land, knowing it would all end like this, would you have done the same? Would you have fought back, or would you have let the storm do the talking? Tell me down below. I'll be reading every word.